So in this video, you're going to learn how to build a cladogram. So remember that cladograms are a tool. They're going to show us which species are more closely related, going back to their ancestors, right? So the idea is going to be, we're going to be able to map that out so we can see those relationships a little bit more clearly than we might just by looking at them in their present forms. Um, so let's say, for instance, we have these 8 species right here, right? There are all sorts of different traits with them, and all sorts of different. The shapes are very similar, but there's some subtle differences between all of them. Well, how do we find out which of these are most closely related? Well, let's create a cladogram. The first step is going to be find out which is the most different, and that's going to be called the outgroup. And I think most of you would imagine here that outgroup is going to be C right here, right? It doesn't have the same shape. It doesn't have any of the interior parts. It's completely different than mostly different than everything else that's in this group. So we're going to place it over here as the member of the outgroup. Now the question becomes, which is the most similar to the outgroup? And since it has nothing in the interior, but the shape is different, that's going to be B right here. So that's going to be our next step. And then we're going to slowly just kind of add steps as to which is most similar to that previous species. So if you look here, we're at B, has nothing inside it. The one thing that would have just one thing inside it, we have species G, so that's going to go next. Then we're going to kind of keep repeating that process, right? So G has an I, what can we do from there? Well, the next thing we have after that is we add some arrows to it. So that's going to be D. So now then D will go. And then you can see that A has the arrows and it has the I, but now we've added a smile. So that's next in line. And then with F, that I has been colored in. So it's going to go here. And then finally to finish it off, we've got E. We're going to kind of forget about this one H right here, because you see it kind of branches off in a different way, right? Instead of going straight along the I, adding parts to it, okay, all of a sudden we added a smile and arrows, but we lost the I. So it kind of looks like D, but without the I. We'll forget about that. That's going to be a little bit more complex cladogram, but we'll deal with that later. Okay, so now we've got this list of, we got these species in order of kind of how they've regressed and added different traits. And then we're going to go and make a chart, and we're just going to chart out those different traits. You can see right here, we have our traits. We have a circle shape, we have an eye, we have 4 big arrows, smile, black eye, and 4 small arrows. And the idea is just, let's put in check marks for what has that given trait, right? So species C has nothing, but species B does have that circle shape. It's the first one with it. C remains blank, B gets 1 checkbox. Species G has 2 checkboxes. It has a circle shape and it has the eye. Species D is going to have the 4 big arrows, the eye, and the circle shape. It's going to have those 3 checkboxes. 3 boxes checked off. It has those 3 traits. And then we continue, go and fill the whole thing out, and eventually end up with species E having all of the traits we've listed there together. So you can see by placing them in order of slowly getting more and more complex as they go across, okay, you see we've added these checkboxes and kind of check them off as we go, because we're adding new traits every single time. So how does this get converted into cladogram? What is a cladogram? Well, cladograms look like this. So we have a line that's going to go from the lower left up to the upper right. And these branches are going to lead to what are called the extant species. This is not extinct. It's actually the exact opposite of extinct, meaning they are the ones that are alive. So extant species are the ones that are alive and they are not extinct. So you can see we have our 7 currently living species, okay? And the branches are going to point to those. So you can see the first branch goes up to C, the diagonal branch goes all the way up to E. And then we're going to fill in a bunch of those branches as we go along, because C, B, G, D, A, F, and E are all our living species. They're extant species. So they all have a branch pointing to them. The second part of the cladogram that's important are the traits. So you can see here we added in this dashed line right here, and that's going to represent the trait that kind of makes a difference between C and B. So that's where we went from oval shape to circle shape. That was our first trait that we added. Okay. It's kind of like a dividing. I usually think of it as almost like a dividing line. Everything to the right of this is going to have that circle shape. Everything to the left of it does not have that trait. So those dashed lines are going to try and create dividers as to when the traits start to show up and when they've stuck around. So the second dash line would be an I, an I. So again, everything to the right has an I, everything to the left does not. Okay, and then we have big arrows being the next one. Everything on the right of big arrows, everything right of that dash has big arrows, everything on the left does not. Let me just go through and fill in the rest of the traits as we go across, okay, going all the way up to 4 small arrows at the end. So how to make sure that we fill this out correctly? Well, we can do what's called the raindrop test. So the raindrop test is basically saying, okay, if I drop in something from, if say species E has a tier, and that tier falls down and it hits here, it should have every, as that gravity brings it down and it goes through, it should hit every single one of these and have every single one of these traits. If it doesn't have every single one of those traits, you've done something wrong about your cladogram. Okay. So the next trait of the cladogram that we're going to look at is the nodes, and that's basically the junctions between the branches. So remember that these species up here, these are extant species, which means they're still alive, but those nodes, those intersection points, this red dot down here, are going to relate to where they're extinct common ancestors. So somewhere down in, way back in time, okay, down here, that ancestor was a common between C and everything else to the right of C. And then we'll have nodes at every single one of these points. We have junction, junction, junction. We have nodes everywhere. Okay, so this is a common ancestor for B and everything to the right of B. Okay, it's not going to be necessarily a common ancestor for C, okay, but it is a common ancestor for B and everything to the right of it. But again, those are extinct ancestors that have slowly started to add traits to get to the point where we're at E. So all of these intersection points are going to represent different nodes where you have those extinct common ancestors between different species. Now, the last part for the cladogram is noting that time is going to be on the y-axis. So the present day is going to be up here at the top, okay? And we're going to steadily get further and further back into history as in time as we go vertically down the cladogram, okay? So you could see if you kind of took a rough eyeball of this whole thing, okay? F's extinct ancestor would be about 50 million years ago, and G's extinct ancestor would be 150 million years ago. Now, these are kind of ballpark figures. They're not exactly like firm set in stone things. Remember, again, we're creating a hypothesis about how we got to the point. Where did E come from in the end, right? And how did that evolutionary path occur as we went along?